Welcome back. Once again, I'm doing a video that's slightly different. I currently don't have any debates on my computer or on my phone that I have to upload. I'll have to do some TikTok lives to get caught up. But in the meantime, since I was talking about this moral compass or political compass type thing that Jonathan Haidt put together a couple videos ago, the Jordan Peterson video, I figured I would take this and just comment on it. I think I did this, but it would have been many, many years ago. I don't remember at all what my results were. I am your typical kind of bleeding heart lefty, but I have some libertarian vibes. So I think the fairness and liberty parts are going to be my highest score, followed by care, and then these three on the bottom I don't think are going to score all that high for me. But we will find out. Is it morally wrong to mistreat your own body or to live unhealthily? Do I agree or do I slightly agree? I think I'm going to say agree. This is not the same thing as is it wrong to get a tattoo? I mean, you're talking about living unhealthily. Men and women should have access to the same opportunities, so I would strongly agree with that. Is it not acceptable for a leader to negotiate with people you would personally consider terrorists, even if hundreds of lives are at stake? I would disagree with this. I think a hostage exchange or something like that is permissible. That doesn't mean that you full-blown do what Ronald Reagan did, which was treason, but there we go. It's important for societies to preserve pride in their traditions and heritage. So I actually do agree with that. There have to be some things that we all agree on, that these are core values, foundational values, and important ones. That doesn't mean that you can't amend a constitution. It doesn't mean that progress can't happen, but there have to be certain things. It's wrong to treat someone differently based on their race. It's wrong to treat someone differently, so I strongly agree. All people should have a right to reproduce, even those with serious inheritable diseases. So yeah, I strongly agree with that. It's important for professional environments to uphold formality and diplomatic etiquette. So I don't know 100% what that means. I'm going to say slightly agree. So I think that professionalism actually is important. I think that if you sort of live like a slob, act like a slob, or just live unseriously and work unseriously, I just don't think that that's very productive. Even as a lefty, no, I hate seeing people out in public, in their pajamas and things like that. Maybe it's because I'm a lefty who's from the Midwest, but yeah. People should always strive to reciprocate any favor done for them later on, even when they're not expected to. So I would say I agree. And again, that's because I'm Midwestern nice. It's shameful to purchase something purely based on its luxury status or trendiness. Do I disagree or do I strongly disagree? No, it's not shameful. Again, I'm not really into gaudiness or anything like that, but I wouldn't say it's shameful. Funny enough, so my experience in living in California is people really are very materialistic and they're very obsessed with talking about money. People who politically and culturally are aligned with me, I can't tell you how often all they do is talk about how much they spent on their house or how much they spent on a vacation. It's almost like they're humble bragging. They're like, oh, we were able to do the whole thing for only $15,000. All they want to do is talk about how much cars cost and houses and things like that. It's actually very weird. Now, I find all of that to be kind of off-putting, again, probably because I'm a product of where I was raised, but at the same time, I don't think it's shameful. People actually get really annoyed with me because they ask me, I just bought a house recently, and they'll be like, oh, how much did you spend? And I'm like, I am not talking about money. I don't talk about money. Or, I buy some new shoes, and the kids will be like, how much were those? And I'll just say, they were enough. Groups of people need hierarchy and established leaders to function cohesively. Okay, so how do I feel about this? I'm going to say I slightly agree, but only because in reading this, it doesn't really seem like it's saying you need one person sort of at the top. That's a little bit more right-leaning, I think, and I'm, more left-leaning. To me, this doesn't exclude the idea of ruling by committee or having steps up, like you can think of in a school or like in a corporate environment or at a government level or whatever. It's not like there's just one person at each step and everybody is subordinate to them. I don't read into that's what this is saying. I firmly believe that if you want to get anything done, you need to have competent people in certain positions, but they need to take their positions really seriously. They need to earn them, not be born into them or anything like that. Sexual activity outside of monogamous romantic relationships should be heavily discouraged. I'm going to say agree. I guess not necessarily strongly agree. Would anybody like it if this happened to them? No. So I'm actually going to say strongly agree. If you ask me, sexual liberty isn't about the idea of using sex in a way that, like, for your own selfish benefit, which harms other people. That doesn't make any sense to a lefty like me. Now, there's a whole question about what if the people in the relationship decide it's okay. That was not the question, so I'm answering I'm not assuming that as the premise at all. It is important for families to stick together and uphold unity even when its members do not get along. I strongly agree with that. Again, this isn't the same thing as asking somebody, should divorce just flat out be illegal? I have family members that I have cut off entirely from me, but it wasn't after years and years of struggle because I don't believe in leaving people behind, and I believe that people are redeemable. A society imbued with divinity, I read that as diversity the first time, is preferable to an atheistic one. I'm going to say disagree, not strongly disagree, because I think that there is some practical social utility in the way that people are kind of united around religious ideas. Now, I find that they tend to be motivated by and they tend to take action against things that I strongly discourage what they do, but that doesn't mean that it isn't still, in some sense, like useful. I think the solution to those kinds of problems is not to wish that those groups didn't exist. It's just for the groups to get better. It's kind of like I've talked to people about, science does all these terrible things. It's like, okay, do you know what the only solution for that is? Better science, not the abolition of science. In raising a child, it would be preferable for them to end up kind and lowly than successful but cold-hearted. So the second one just sounds like psychopathy. So I'm going to say strongly agree. It's never justifiable to invade and militarily occupy another country that has not harmed or threatened others. So do I agree or do I strongly agree? I'm going to see if I can think of any kind of possible justification. Yeah, I really can't think of a possible exception to that, so strongly agree. Providing negative feedback to peers should typically be done sparingly and politely, not to offend with bluntness. I'm going to agree, but not strongly agree. So this is some of and this kind of takes me back to schooling and childhood. And I think this should come from your friends, not necessarily from teachers or adults. But some of the absolutely most crucial and important things or lessons I ever learned were extremely embarrassing for me. And I think, unfortunately, we've kind of gotten away from that in a sense. There should be social consequences when you do something that's really not okay. Unfortunately, I think we've kind of gotten into this culture of, oh, let's try to be funny all the time. Let's try to do pranks all the time. Let's try to go viral all the time. And more people just really honestly feels like people don't want to call people out on what they're doing. Certain punishments are so cruel and violent that even the most evil and dangerous individuals do not deserve them. Well, I mean, maybe they deserve them, but I don't think the state or any person has the right to do it. So I'm going to actually strongly agree with that. Society should encourage children to be fully obedient to their parents and defer to their decisions until they reach maturity. I'm not sure if I slightly disagree or if I disagree. Let me think. I'm gonna have to go with disagree, not strongly disagree, because I think there are certain things that kind of should be up to the parents and not like legally up to the children, but not that many things. There's no end goal noble enough and no circumstance desperate enough to ever justify directly sacrificing the lives of unwilling innocents. Okay, so let me try to think of something like really extreme here. Let's say that there's this boardroom meeting of like known terrorists or whatever happening in some hotel somewhere or something. And you know that if you drop a precision airstrike right on the boardroom, it'll kill all of them. And let's say it's like a crazy, like 50 of them, a crazy high number. But it'll also kill the person working at the front desk. I'm okay with that. I think it's horrible. I think in a way, it really is unfair. But I honestly think that the potential for doing nothing, the potential bad for doing nothing in that circumstance versus doing that, I think is outweighed. This makes me feel so gross. Admittedly, that's an extremely weird circumstance that probably wouldn't happen. So now I'm thinking, do I slightly disagree because I think there are very small exceptions to this? Or do I agree with it but not strongly agree with it because I'm leaving room for the exception? I think I technically have to say slightly disagree. Responsible citizens who are not members of the military or police force should have legal access to basic firearms for self-defense. I agree with the idea. In practice, it doesn't seem to always work too well because people just, like, you don't have to be a criminal and you don't have to necessarily be an irresponsible person for accidents to happen. And from what I've seen, the data indicates that you're dozens of times more likely to be killed by your own firearm accidentally than you are to even like have your house broken into, which means that the more you recommend that people do this, the more that you recommend people keep firearms in your house, the more people are going to die from firearms. But that's a completely different question than should like the legal right exist. And I guess I agree that the legal right should exist. It's just such a shame that humans are such terrible people. Those who have earned large amounts of wealth should be obligated to provide some of it toward public welfare and or less fortunate members of their society. Do I slightly agree or do I agree? I'm going to say slightly agree. I don't want a society that functions based off of like the hope that people will give charitable contributions of their own accord. So I only like slightly agree with this. Ideally, I would hope that the society is like literally built in a way that holds up the people that are worst off, rather than relying on the generosity of billionaires. Pursuing the goal of raising a family and a career that helps achieve this goal is more noble than pursuing a child-free life path. Yeah, I'm going to disagree. I don't really understand what would make that more noble. Sure, a lot of people, maybe even most people, like having kids and a family and supporting themselves, that's kind of like their dream. That's what they want to do with the world. But some people do amazing things and don't have time for that, or it just never works out for them. And I don't think that that's inignoble. I don't know what the word for that is. Citizens should never be denied the right to non-violently assemble and protest in public spaces, even when it is likely to progress into rioting. Do I strongly agree or I guess I strongly agree. I mean, this is the First Amendment, so I don't really feel like going against that really in almost any case. Ensuring wrongdoers experience discipline through retributive punishment is an essential component of justice and ensuring the proper functioning of society. No, I disagree. This has literally been studied. I mean, like most things that sound like good ideas, the Scandinavian countries have tried it, and they're seeing extremely good results. Like in Norway, for example, even the most deranged psychopathic criminals, they get access to, like, their cells look like dorm rooms. They're given access to the internet. they can actually sue the country or the state or whatever to get access for more things. Like the guy in Norway that famously went to that island and shot a bunch of people, mostly they were children. He's not like in America, he would be he'd either get the death penalty or be subject basically to torture through the solitary confinement and all of that stuff. And when you think about the horrible things that have been done, it sounds like sort of what they deserve. But when you have a system that works that way, it's not healthy, it's not productive, and it doesn't do anything to mitigate future crimes. Whereas the restorative justice system that's been implemented in other places, they see far lower rates of recidivism and that type of violent crime in general. Protecting the public's right to privacy from surveillance and espionage should be a greater priority than using said tools to catch terrorists or criminals. I strongly agree with this one. There have been a lot of creepy news stories that have come out kind of recently. Some of it on like the first time they tried to ban TikTok, they introduced this bill that just gave the state, or gave like the federal government the right to invade your privacy like you wouldn't believe. They just couch it as like a national security thing and a ban to get rid of this communist app or whatever. There's also a story, you probably heard about it because it's pretty famous. I think it was the Golden State Killer, where they used like DNA evidence, but not his evidence, from like other people that he was related to in order to tie him to the scene of the crime. I think it was that guy. If we erode too much of that, then all of a sudden the government and whoever else, the insurance companies, whoever they want to sell that information to, I mean, they're going to have access to not just like what you do online, but like your DNA, your genetics. And I don't think we can have a society like that because people suck. Although taste in art, architecture, and style is technically subjective, it is important that a society tries to uphold certain standards of beauty and sophistication. I'm actually going to slightly agree on this. It is preferable for society to promote that people work through their mental health problems by talking about them openly rather than trying to hide and ignore them. I strongly agree with that. Don't really have too much else to say about it. It's important for nations to pursue a level of economic and military self-sufficiency to avoid dependency on others, even if it results in lower standards of living. Okay, I was really on board until the very end. That's extremely weird. I'm not a fan of being isolationist, but that said, I wouldn't call myself like a neo-lib globalist or anything like that. I think being self-sufficient is like extreme. I think that's extremely important, like from a national security perspective, but also from a sense of like national pride and things like that. But the part about lowering standards of living, that's so weird. So I mostly agree except for the end. So does that mean that I just agree, or does that mean that I slightly disagree? I keep having this problem. If I'm not all the way there, does that mean that I just don't agree all the way, or does it mean that I slightly disagree? I'm going to say slightly disagree just because the second part there is so bad, and that doesn't need to happen. There are ways of doing it where you preserve your standard of living. I mean, there have to be. It is a sign of a deeply flawed society when somebody can inherit a large sum of wealth or power without having to work for it themselves, while others inherit little or nothing. I guess I'm going to disagree with this, and here's why. This isn't a question about the 1%. And I think the fact that we have a society where only a couple of families have half the entire wealth in the country, that's the sign that the society is deeply flawed. But that's very different from inheritance. I don't think that when you die, all of your wealth should be taxed and then redistributed. I don't think that. Some of it, sure, maybe even a lot of it for people that have more money than 1 million people making the median wage would make in 1,000 lifetimes. Sure, take a big chunk of it, but not all of it. All citizens charged with a crime, no matter how obviously guilty or problematic they are, should have the right to an impartial trial and all of that stuff. Yep, I strongly agree. Because, and this is a slippery slope argument, Even if we say the most obviously guilty person, terrorist, whatever of all time was guilty, and there's no trial or legal process or whatever, then what's to stop people from saying, well, actually, we draw the line at this certain thing, which isn't at all like the most obvious case ever, but because people are way too easily influenced. As long as the right person is saying it, then you can get tens of millions of people to all agree with it. It is wrong to cover for a close friend if they've done something heinous, such as performing a hit and run. I mean, I wouldn't call a hit and run the most. There are many more heinous things than that. So I'm going to change this question and say that it's actually murder. And in this case, I strongly agree, because to me, that's what heinous is. The primary goal of government should be to prioritize the interests of their country and those who currently live in it, rather than pursue the well-being of humanity at large. So I strongly agree, actually. That should be the first thing that a government does. This is something that's changed a little bit about me in my older age. I mean, I'm not quite 33 years old yet, but to me, I just think like the fact that we have people who are homeless in this country, that we have the opioid epidemic that we do, that we're falling so far behind on education, means that the billions of dollars that Israel or Ukraine gets should be spent on solving our problems first. That being said, I do think that, like, for example, and this would even work from a national security perspective, like whatever's going on in Central and South America that's causing the influx of immigration to the United States, rather than like just ignore what do we do with asylum seekers, etc. at the moment, I do think that it actually does make perfect logical sense to, I mean, think about like all the billions of dollars we give to other countries every single year that don't need it. Imagine if we spent even 5% of that, of those funds, trying to do things in these parts of the world that are right next to us that are causing us huge problems. That would obviously do so much more. It would be a way better use of those funds. It would do more good. Now, I actually think that in an instance like that, you actually are prioritizing the interests of your country and helping humanity, like in general, in a way. But I feel like that's something that we should only do once we don't have one of the worst violent crime rates in the entire world. Once we don't have some of the worst income inequality in the world. Well, I actually don't know if we have some of the worst income inequality in the world, but like, for example, I know the ratio of like CEO to average worker pay here, I think it's higher than it is anywhere in the world. A society works best when most of its members share similar values, beliefs, social norms, and mannerisms, with newcomers being expected to assimilate, adopt those values before joining. I'm going to agree, and again, we're like, I can see how this sounds very right-wing, but no, that's not where I'm approaching it from. I don't think we are a Christian nation, and so I don't think we should be Christian nationalists or something. But that doesn't, you can have a pluralistic society in terms of its beliefs, but there needs to be a grounding and an agreement upon like, these are the things that we value and are important and are kind of non-negotiable. I really just feel like those things would basically just be our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and our laws. As long as we can all agree on those, then, you know, we should be able to do okay. Again, this says nothing about the question of like, if you can't speak perfect English, you shouldn't be allowed into the country. That's not what I'm talking about here. If an external threat ever attempts to exploit one's homeland and its people, every citizen should be willing to stay behind and sacrifice their life to defend it if called upon. So if I'm understanding this, isn't talking about like, do you support the idea of a draft necessarily? It's just saying, do you believe that you should be like anchored like literally to the soil in the place you are to defend it? I guess I strongly agree with this. I believe this is attempting to describe a situation like what's going on in Ukraine right now. I think Ukraine should absolutely go to the negotiating table. I think they should have gone to the negotiating table a year ago. But yeah, you should absolutely be willing to defend like where you are. Some people, on the basis of their talent, risk-taking, hard work, and/or contributions, are more deserving of wealth than others. The use of that word deserving there is kind of weird. To me, what this is saying is, you know, if you do get dealt a lucky hand a little bit, but you also put in the work, do you deserve the wealth? Now, I agree with that. I don't necessarily think I'll go strongly agree because, you know, for example, does an NBA player work harder than, you know, like an on-call, like a nurse that works in an ER center? No, the NBA player wouldn't say so either, but they obviously make vastly different salaries. Does that NBA player deserve that? Well, not exactly, but I mean, that is the system that they've built up, and it's a system that exists because of cooperation by other people. I mean, we watch the games, so they make the money. If one enjoys the quality of life and culture provided by their nation, in its current state, they should feel obligated to celebrate and advocate for actions that increase its external influence on the region and/or world stage. Okay, this is a weird and kind of complicated question. What do I think? Well, I think that the world could benefit from less autocracy and more democracy. So that's part of the culture here that I think we should espouse to other parts of the world. But then when it says increase your external influence on the region and/or world stage, how good of a job has the United States done on asserting its own influence on the world? That's been an absolute catastrophe. That being said, I'm going to say slightly agree. Look, we talk about all the time about implementing good ideas that we see, usually like in European countries, and trying to bring those over here. Now, in general, a lot of those countries are kind of similar to ours. They have constitutions, they have elections and things like that. They're not autocratic. So I don't really have any problem with espousing or like advocating and celebrating the type of system that we exist in and hoping that its influence over the world becomes stronger. I think it's no coincidence that over the last, like, especially 100 years, the replacement and collapse of, you know, kingdoms and dictatorships and whatever for democracies has led to human well-being and flourishing. I think that's no accident. Certain inanimate objects should be treated as sacred, immoral to disrespect them, even when no property damage is done and nobody is around to witness it. Example, doing comedic poses in front of a war memorial. Okay, so I'm pretty sure that I strongly disagree with this. Can I think of an instance where I would want to agree with it? Like, I don't know, what's the most lefty SJW thing I can think of? I'm not an SJW, by the way. I don't know, going to like tribal land that is sacred and doing a Fortnite dance. But it says nobody's around and nobody witnesses it. I don't think you should do that, but this is literally a victimless crime. It's just getting to that like purity and sanctity thing, saying certain things should never be done no matter what. And I strongly disagree with that. I guess the question isn't saying that in this particular example, nobody sees it. It's just saying even when no damage is done and nobody's around. I'm still going to treat it the same way and say strongly disagree. An individual who is well-intended but could be considered a social misfit, weak or timid, and dull-witted should be given the same courtesy and respect as their peers rather than being treated as a burden to society. So, strongly agree, not much more to say. Mentally sound adults should have the absolute right to do what they want to their own bodies, even when it may be detrimental to public health. Okay, so I believe that there should be exceptions. So does that mean that I don't agree all the way, or does it mean that I slightly disagree? I don't know if you guys heard about this recently, but like a year ago or a couple years ago, Oregon, they just decriminalized basically all hard drugs, and they really regret it. It's been an absolute catastrophe. People just it, instead of like the idea was like make it less stigmatized and less of a burden like on the police or whatever. And but what's actually happened is you have insane and dangerous people literally like in the downtowns and the public parks just openly doing heroin, and it's obviously not good. And you can blame the fact that they didn't like set up rehabilitation centers or something like that on it, but I think actually when you let people do whatever they want, there are certain things that are so powerful that it just traps people, and you get a much worse outcome. So I'm going to say slightly disagree. That's how I feel about it. During peacetime, the government should be prohibited from seizing the personal property of law-abiding citizens for state planning, such as trying to construct public railway without their consent, even if dues are paid in compensation. Okay, so what would be an example of this? Like, let's say the United States has no high-speed rail systems, unlike a lot of developed countries. So should the United States have the right to, like through, I don't know, eminent domain or whatever, just say, no, we're going to build on your land and we're going to pay you fair market value for it? Should the government be prohibited from ever doing something like that? I'm so like in the United States, it's not like we're really strapped for land or anything like that, but I still don't think that would be okay. So I'm going to say agree, not necessarily strongly disagree. Somebody could probably talk me into a case where I could understand how this maybe could be a decent thing. I don't know. I think there were a lot of lawsuits under the Trump administration for people who, like people that lived in Texas, people that probably wanted a border wall, but they were going to build on their land and like they couldn't get permission, and there were lawsuits and things like that. So, I mean, it's a problem that exists on both ends of the spectrum, but whatever. Democracy, where leadership is determined by public election in which every citizen has a right to vote, is universally preferable to any method of state governance where leadership is appointed from the top down instead. I'm pretty sure I strongly agree with this. The United States is a republic, not a democracy. Well, yeah, but it's still democratic. The way a republic is just a democracy that doesn't apply to every single person. Yeah, I can't think of an exception to that. It is distasteful for a citizen to publicly question the technical knowledge of scientists, the bravery of those in dangerous lines of work, or the work ethic of manual laborers without themselves having achieved similar feats. I guess I probably strongly agree with this. I like this question because it's white collar and blue collar. I like that. If the current governing system has proven itself to be competent at ensuring the well-being of its citizens, all of its laws should be followed to preserve social stability, including ones that seem arbitrary or that one might disagree with. Okay, here's how I read this question. Sometimes, like the freedom of speech, like if you really believe in freedom of speech, it means that you believe in it for people that have detestable ideas that you hate. For example, like the ACLU, they protected the right of neo-Nazis to march. This is like a really famous case in the, I don't know if it was the late 90s or the early 2000s or what. So I'm going to say strongly agree on this one. That doesn't mean that I'm defending the current system or well, I mean, I think the system is good, but people don't act out the system well. Because do we have corruption? Yeah, absolutely we have corruption, even though we have laws on the books that are supposed to deal with that. Just because some people aren't following the laws doesn't mean that like the attitude of the people shouldn't be that we ought to follow those laws. Certain activities are so disgusting that they are deeply immoral, even if completely consensual, physically harmless, and done privately. Oh, God. I'm going to say slightly disagree. Now, I know there are things that I would just never endorse, even if they don't necessarily harm anybody. But that doesn't mean that any conceivable thing is fine. Society is at its most admirable when businesses, schools, and public institutions follow a culture of perfectionism, prioritizing the enforcement of deadlines, punctuality, quality control, and commitment to long-term planning over more flexible and lax systems. I'm only gonna slightly agree with this. I'm a very punctual person. I hate when people are late, and as a teacher, I absolutely cannot stand when people take a lackadaisical approach to learning and education, and just like this is from students and teachers as well. I think if you want to do good things, you have to have these, but that doesn't mean that you should absolutely enjoy and have fun doing what you do at the same time. So I'm only going to slightly agree. It is unethical for the government to place restrictions on what ideologies, beliefs, and opinions can and cannot be expressed within social media and academia, no matter how dangerously they might be considered. I guess I'll agree with this, not necessarily strongly agree. My opinion on this is kind of like the Bill Clinton abortion take. It should be safe, legal, and rare. That's how I feel about censorship. It should be extremely rare, and it should be within the legal bounds. And what was the other part? Safe? I don't know what safe would mean with regard to that, but there we go. It should be considered socially unacceptable for respected high-status authority figures to demand preferential treatment from civil society. It should be considered for them to demand yeah, strongly agree. It is preferable for the public to be aware of a hard truth concerning them and have it result in outrage and instability than it is for them to keep it under blissful ignorance. Yeah, I think that you can't possibly ever get better if you don't confront your own mistakes, even if they were in the past, and even if they were done by people that aren't, the people that are responsible are all gone, and even if it will piss people off, because you can't possibly get better if you aren't doing that. All right, let's see the results. So I was basically right, except care and liberty were actually tied. I thought my care score would be a little bit lower. My purity score is very low. My in-group score is probably higher than other left-leaning people have it. So anyways, those are the results. Maybe you learned something about me or about yourself that you didn't previously know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have too much else to say about it. Thanks for watching.